Good evening, folks. By some miracle, we are live once again. Let me get everything switched over and set up, and we will commence the discussion of beatbox and beatbox related products in today's jam stream. All right, let me fix my mono. Welcome to the stream, folks. How's everybody doing today? First off, thanks Red Dragon for the resub. 16 months. It's a long time, almost a year and a half. Much appreciated, dude. Likewise, hope you're doing well. This has been an interesting day. We were supposed to do this stream much earlier, but the weather decided it was going to make my life a little more difficult. But we're here. And there are boxes to beat. I see Mr. Dirt Bones is here. How's it going, Dirt Bones? Good to see ya. Dirt Bones says, I live for better or for worse. That's a mood. I definitely hear that. This was a very challenging week. I won't burden chat with the details, but let's just say it was not easy. But we're here. So let me turn on this simple background loop, and I'll talk through what we're going to be covering today. I put this one together just real quickly before the stream. I won't keep it, but it actually turned out to be a little more catchy than I expected. But we might be able to use some of the ideas when we get to the BGM brainstorming section of the stream later. Alright, hopefully playback is alright. BGM shouldn't be too loud. I'm going to turn it off in a minute. Let me know if I need to tweak anything with my audio setup. Dirtbone says, been a while. I've been in the stream. Been a while since I've been in the stream because I've mostly been watching Wazzy streams. Yeah, that's fair. She's more entertaining than me anyway. I'm sure the Toxic Here crew has been up to their usual shenanigans. Alright. So as the stream title suggests, we are going to be covering a couple topics that I've been workshopping all week leading up to the jam stream today. We'll start with intro and warm-up to get the proper blood flowing. I'll run through some practice drills and freestyle stuff for a little bit. And then for technique and sound theory in the discussion, we're going to be focusing on the concept of rhythms, which is not a new topic for the beatbox discussion. But we're going to be focusing a little bit on atypical rhythms today. Something we've touched on in previous streams and something I've wanted to talk about for a bit. We're going to talk about what happens if you're trying to construct a beat using something that's not a standard or common rhythm, and kind of how you work on different aspects of that, which is a big part of practicing in beatboxing. So that'll be interesting. I have a couple examples to kind of talk through, and even though I don't have a comprehensive music background, hopefully it'll make sense. So we'll do that for a bit, and after technique and sound theory, we will go into BGM brainstorming, where we put our two collective brain cells together to come up with ideas for future BGM tracks. And just for full transparency, I have been on a bit of a break from tinkering around with the loop. Been working on some other things and editing projects that I currently am getting ready to release soon. So I haven't done a lot of loop recording outside of what we do on the jam streams. So I'm kind of looking forward to getting back into the swing of things and tinkering around with the tool set some more, so we can have items and assets to use for other projects. All right, we can go ahead and clear this one off. Again, kind of a moody, down-tempo-ish type of just real simple loop to get some background noise. But the combination of the low bass, the boost, and then the sliced 329 synth seem to mesh together well, so maybe we can bring some of those ideas forward into one of our BGM experiments for later. I do have the synth hooked up. Like usual, it's off to reduce noise. When we get to BGM brainstorming, I will switch my devices around. I'll plug back into my Scarlett for the mic, and then the synth will be turned on so that we can pipe all of the instrumentation stuff through the synth to the loop station. But we'll go ahead and start off with a little bit of freestyle practice, get the blood warm and moving. And after that, we'll work on some sound theory. I'll keep an eye on the audio levels. Let me know if anything is hitting on the mic too hard or pushing me into the red, and I can tweak it on the fly. So let's get started with some warm up. think that will do for warm up for now. I kind of strung everything together rather than stopping a talk in between little micro patterns and routines. So let me change the caption and we'll jump straight into technique and sound theory. Make sure my cables aren't sitting directly on my keyboard. So like I mentioned at the top of the stream, the main thing I wanted to talk through today is some kind of more developing discussions on the idea of tinkering around with rhythms when it comes to beatboxing. And again, since the very first jam stream, we've always in some way kind of tied things back to the idea of a rhythm when it comes to the percussion or drum set that you're employing whenever you're making sounds in beatboxing. Fairly simple concept, but for people who are interested in learning and developing the beatbox skill set, one thing that's pretty handy is the ability to experiment around and construct more complicated rhythms and continue to experiment with things as you learn. And again, I'm no expert on really unusual time signatures and rhythms, but I'm going to kind of talk about a few things today that I've learned along the way and been kind of using to drill and reinforce a lot of the basics when it comes to beatboxing. So you're getting kind of a direct look into what I've learned in the amount of time it's been since I first started, both through just experimenting, listening to music, picking out things I hear, and also listening to some of the pros in the scene talk about stuff like rhythm composition and all that. So I think it'll be an interesting discussion, again, for folks who have a music background and have anything to add when it comes to the idea of rhythms or time signatures and whatnot. Feel free to toss in any thoughts or opinions. These discussions aren't meant to be lectures. So if people have questions or want me to focus on certain things, by all means, just let me know in the chat. So the first thing is going to be sort of our baseline and how we establish what's considered a standard and or common rhythm when it comes to putting together sounds in the beatbox sound set. And this will be a bit of a retread of what we talked about before, and I'll try and explain kind of where we're going with some examples along the way. So I'm pretty sure in music, the most common time signature is 4/4. It's the least unusual, and I think it meshes well with a lot of different genres and styles of music, and you see it in a lot of things. And I do have a metronome on here. I haven't used it in forever, so I have to figure out where to put it, or where it's put on the loop station. Let me see if I can find it. There we go. Okay. All right. So if I need to use this as an example, I can. But if we think about like a 4/4 time, it's just a 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 beats per measure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, and is a bit constant. The rhythm doesn't change, and it sounds consistent depending on what kind of song you're listening to. But if we translate that over into beatbox terms, just like a simple rock beat in 4/4 would be a really good simple example to use. Just something that sounds like almost seems like it could be half, but without getting to anything that deviates from just an even number of beats per measure. You'll hear that in a lot of like rock-ish type stuff that doesn't get into the more kind of progressive or experimental side of the rhythms. We'll get to that a little bit later. But the 1, 2, 3, 4, even electronic music might be a slightly more easy to illustrate example. So we're just doing a kick line here. 1, 2, 3, 4. And when you're first getting into beatboxing, especially if you don't have a music background and you're trying to figure out the best way to kind of drill, learn how to keep time and be consistent. We've talked about this in some of our basic drill overviews we've talked about here on these jam streams. But if you start simple with components of the drum kit, as it were, and learn how to just be comfortable and consistent with one or two components of the rhythm at a time, then as elementary as it sounds, that is a really good way to just train your brain and your muscles that are making the sounds to like follow on the metronome. And we talked about metronome training too. Using that as an example would be equally helpful if we use the sample on my loop here. And I'll make sure it's loud enough people can hear. Might be a little soft. There we go. This is the main volume. Okay. So this is 4/4. We count it. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, without the metronome, or even with the metronome in like your headphones, using it as a training tool when you're doing beatbox practice, even if you're just starting on the kick. And I know it sounds very simple to practice, but when you're first learning the sounds and learning how to get control over creating them, having that be second nature, as simple as it sounds, just following along on a metronome track or like a simulated drum track like this is a good way to train in the beginning. After you kind of get used to doing just the kick by itself, you could start adding the hi-hat. So the example here, it has the hat on the same note as the kick, which you can't really do in beatboxing because you're using your lips to make the kick. But you can have the hat be on the offbeat if you wanted. So instead of it just being on the 1, 2, 3, 4, you could have. So you have the kick on 1, hat on 2, and then it leaves a third spot for when you add in the snare. So thinking about simple beginner level snares, I usually recommend people learn the PF snare first, depending on how you learn and who's teaching you. That's a fairly simple one to pick up mechanically and then just practice on getting that sound cleaner. So PF snare, one of my favorites, use it in a lot of things. If we slot that into the rhythm on beat 3, you would have thinking about our example here, we can even play along to it. This has the hat and the kick on 1, and then the snare on 2. So it goes. Whichever way you wanted to rearrange the 3 instruments, kick, hat, snare, within that 4/4 beat would be, whatever feels the most natural and most comfortable when you're first learning. I would stick to 1 or 2 of those. And then as you get used to the layering and being able to alternate between the 3 sounds, then you can make it a little more complicated or vary where the different sounds are falling in the count. So you get yourself practicing more than just a standard sequence, if that makes sense. Moving on from there, taking that example, just straight 4/4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's take the example that I use. We're going. The next tier of complexity in drills, logically, would be to add in more notes somewhere, but still keep the same rhythm. And that's where it gets a little bit challenging in the practice and why practicing at the basic level is really important in beatboxing. So let's say you want to just add another kick, add like a double kick in there to give the rhythm a bit more variation. And it doesn't have to be on every measure too. You could do something like. and then you're adding that staggered kick to give more of a transition between the measures, and you could do that. If you want to, again, ratchet it up a layer further while still keeping the same tempo, you make the kick pattern a lot more complicated and you leave everything else the same. So you might get something that still follows the. Now I got to be a little careful I don't like completely overcomplicate the rhythm because I'm not used to thinking backwards like this. But you could take something that goes. That gets a little bit too complicated, but. That's stretching the rhythm out a little bit more, but the point is you can take the original rhythm and start switching up little bits and pieces here to change its complexity and change how you're practicing, so you're not just doing the same sequence of 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 to the point where down the road, kind of the way I practice now, having spent many years just practicing a lot of the basics and putting things together. So now when I'm practicing my rhythms, it's not just the. This is going to be a slight sidebar. Well, I'll kind of circle back to the alternate time signatures if I can parse out a good way to explain them. But instead of practicing, my drills tend to sound more like. That's 3, I believe. But the example stands. Instead of it being a simple rhythm that I'm forcing my brain to repeat and be consistent with, I'm starting at more complex, more advanced combinations of the different sounds, and then that becomes my drill. Let me see if I can get a better 4/4 example. The other thing that's tricky about me trying to do that, an example like that, is because mentally I think of places to put technicality sound sets and combinations, which would be the equivalent of your drum fills in between the measures, where, you know, for the sake of adding flavor and variety to the overall beat, a percussionist on like a drum set, for example, when they're doing the rhythm and they have a break to sort of breathe, they'll throw in something that fills in the gap. I don't know if that's where the term drum fill comes from, but that's what it functions like. In beatboxing, you do that with technicality or other combinations of sound sets so that it gives, again, some spice, some flavor to whatever it is you're doing. And even when you're just doing the in between the measures, you can still think of ways to add a couple extra things once you start getting really comfortable with doing just the simple rhythm on its own over and over again. Something might be that's a rhythm switch, but even adding in a little bit of variety in between when it fits. If you try and shoehorn too much in, it'll sound like the rhythm is very sloppy and not coherent. But that comes with just practicing and experimenting around with how much space between the different sections you have to work with. And that's where the whole idea of kind of improvising and coming up with new ways of combining things and sound sets in beatboxing, to me, is very interesting. So let's lean a bit on the metronome or sample beat within my loop station to go to a bit of a non-standard rhythm. And we'll start with this one's simple explanation, and we'll go 3/4. So instead of 1 2 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4, it's gonna go 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3, and it'll sound different. So if we switch it down to 3/4, here's how it changes. And this is kind of a slow 3/4. 1. I gotta think of how to count something this slow. 1 2 3 1 2 3. I might be a little off on that. Again, I'm not a music theory expert, but the overall rhythm changes from the standard 1, 2, 3, 4. You have a different beat count, so then it changes your overall flow of the rhythm. A better way that I can explain it, and this is just based on my experience, again, a music teacher will probably be able to explain it much more by the book than I can. A 3/4 rhythm has a lot of different versions you'll see, and I'll start with a simple example and work up to one of the more complicated ones that I've been working on lately. Some of the folks that hang out on stream might have heard me do it as part of the Drop a Beat Redeem somewhat recently. But think of a waltz rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's easier for me to explain and count than what the drum machine on my loop did. So we think 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, one beat less. Instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And when you're learning in beatboxing, again, I'll give another example of one that's not waltz. But when I was thinking about ways to practice, having that being one of my few points of reference into an actual rhythm that was in 3/4, again, we'll take the same combination of instruments, kick, hat, PF snare, just for the sake of consistency. If we want to think of how to do that 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 rhythm, something in a waltz tempo would be that's with 2 snares, leaving out the hat. That's a little less natural, but I believe that's still 3/4. Kick, hat, snare on the 1, 2, 3, and then the measure starting over again. I'm going to practice that way because that does not feel as intuitive to me as the double kick, double snare waltz pattern, and then one of the BGM tracks that was part of Songs of the Spiral, it's called Waltz of Wealth. It uses that same rhythm, not that exact same instrument composition, but that same rhythm. And that was the first time I was able to successfully write a waltz track. It was a very proud moment in my wannabe music composition career, but it followed that exact same rhythm. And I don't know if it's double snare like that, but the that's sort of the basic way I've trained on a 3/4 rhythm. Now, the more advanced version that I've been doing lately, I want to say I know a song that is in the same count, but it's not where I learned how to do the rhythm. But if we take the idea of 3/4, but we make it a much more complicated rhythm, let me run through the example and I'll kind of explain the point of practicing it this way with the drill. So same thing, 3 count. It's either 3/4 or 6/8. Someone who's a proper music background could probably tell me, but it's the same type of counts. It's either doubled or a single count. And that one sounds like And so, real quickly to explain where that rhythm comes from, just in my brain, because it exists throughout a bunch of music. That rhythm is very, almost 100% lifted from the song The Summoning by Sleep Token, one of my favorite bands. It's about the same pace, and I remember listening to that song for the very first time and immediately being able to tell that the time signature was weird on that one because of the way it starts, the way the percussion goes, and especially the way the vocals are timed with the rhythm. Immediately when I heard it, I had to listen for a couple passes to see roughly, how it's different from like a standard 4. But I basically took that rhythm and turned it into a drill because it's very different from a lot of the stuff that I am used to practicing. So whenever I talk about like slightly more complicated versions of like a 3/4, that's the rhythm I'm talking about. And one thing you'll hear, and I did it a bit in the example, it starts off with the same sort of loop, the more or less the same. But in order to, again, get the practice and work on building complexity, a lot of things that I add in are things with the kick rhythm and the hats. I don't mess with the snare a ton. I might add a couple like double snares, but usually it's varying the kicks and then adding in hat rhythms to give it more flair to it and more complexity. So what I mean by that is it would sound something like and again, I tried to throw in as many different examples while not keeping two of them the same back to back in measures. I wouldn't really do that if I was using that for a long-term beat in something, because it would sound really like chaotic and messy. But the idea of keeping the same rhythm and then maybe every several measures adding maybe a kick variation or something in there, or adding a slightly different hi-hat run or an open versus closed hat sequence in between while keeping the tempo the same, the snare the same, and everything else. That has proven to be one of the most challenging types of ways to rhythm train that I've been working on. I've only been doing it for about a month. And so I want to keep working on that as far as tweaking the example, learning how to make it a little more complicated. Another time signature we can talk about, which this is going to be tough to explain because I'm not an expert on it, but 6/8 is basically the double of this. Instead of 3/4, it's 6/8. And using the drum machine, this is what it sounds like. I think it's going to probably sound similar. It actually sounds very similar to the 3/4 because it's just double. It's a longer count, but the same kind of allocation of beats, if that makes sense, just twice as much. What I mean by that is, again, as simple an explanation as I can give, not being a music person, where the 3/4 is 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. The 6/8 is 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6. So you can basically have things stretched out over two measures because it's 8 beats in total. If you were to equate it the same. The 3/4 is 1 2 3 repeat 1 2 3 repeat 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. 6/8 is 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6. And I'm still trying to figure out a good way to work that into a different example of rhythm training and beatboxing than the one that I was just explaining, because the sleep token example, we'll just call it the sleep token rhythm, that one could probably fall into like a 6/8 category depending on how I have it written out. I don't know. I like to think of it as just like a bunch of 3/4s stapled together back to back. Again, I don't know too many music theory people, but I could probably ask them and say, like, what would be the biggest example as far as, one versus the other, A versus B? Red Dragon asks, can you mix the 4 and 6 in the same song? You can have tempo switches. Like, so what that usually does in songs is you'll have a rhythm that goes for a certain time signature, and then it might change to another time signature. It might go half time. It might change to like from a 4/4 to a 3/4 for a few and then go back. I don't think you can really alternate like one after the other. The rhythm's going to sound disjointed. Here's the best example I can give. You're asking a question that I didn't actually think about for the lesson today, so let's see if I can pull a good example. We could have the 4/4 rhythm, and the best example I can give to what Red Dragon is asking about would be if we had a rhythm change somewhere in between, like a transitional period of the rhythm changing to a different time signature, and then it goes back. So I guess the best way to think about that would be if it went not the cleanest example, but when it switches to that alternate time signature, you can feel the pace of the song change slightly. It goes from just a plodding 1-2 to almost like a staggered bit of rhythm changing, and that's the 3-4 kicking in. So when it goes and then it switches back, then it reverts back to the 1-2-3-4. And so the way you would count it is the best way to tell that it changes. But real skilled musicians, when they have switches in tempo like that, they blend it together and make it seem like it's flowing from one to the other and not sounding like a real abrupt jerking of like the rhythm from one to the other and then it's back. So that's a good question. A good example on seeing that in music would be, look at any song where you can feel the beat change. And that tells you where they're employing like a change in time signature. Sometimes, again, halftime is just cutting everything in half. Let's see, going from 4-4 to 2-4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. It would go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. That's probably better shown with the rhythm itself, and that'll explain it better than I can. So like a halftime. Here's 4-4 again. And now if we go down to 2-4, it's shrinking the rhythm. It's cutting it in half, essentially. You can hear that the snare's gone. Well, thinking about it in beatbox terms, and half it would go almost like a polka rhythm. A little bit harder to tell when it's the same thing, essentially, but it's shrunk and cut in half. Now, getting outside of my ability to explain things in really clear terms, we can still illustrate it thanks to the drum machine on the loop station here. You go for a really irregular tempo where you have more beats than measure. Like here is 7-4, which I honestly would have to look up what songs are written in this because I don't know. But this is what it sounds like. So those extra beats, that is an extra 3, I think. Now, how you count 7-4, I think it would have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think. But it's hard to tell. It's very unusual. It sounds normal to get to the end, and that's where the extra's coming from. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, there it is. This was like a double at the end that ties everything together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 ish. Not really an expert on that type of irregular signature. If I can figure out a good way to make that into a beatboxing example, I will, because I'm pretty sure that's very uncommon in the scene. Here's 5-8, so that'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Almost sounds like a doo-wop-ish type of rhythm. I might be having one beat too much in there. That's also an interesting one. I might have to think about a way to practice that. Oh, we even have different beats we can use to illustrate that. I haven't messed around with the drum machine too much here. I've used the metronome. We've shown it off on stream a few times. But there's different set beats that the loop station can use to illustrate whatever you're telling it to do. Here, let's go back to 4/4. This is a different beat at 4/4. Here, this is number 5. Okay, this is a little bit more what I was talking about for like a slightly more complicated version of the example we used to start. So that's adding in a double kick. So is it on every? Oh no, it's every other. And then you start getting into things like adding in like the BTB for adding triple kicks. So I'm better use the example. There we go. That's a better example. Not the cleanest execution, but adding in the... It's like a galloping staggered kick. And then from there, you start building out the overall level of complexity and speed as you get more comfortable with putting together the different sounds in the percussion kit. And from there, it kind of levels up the way you drill and the different types of things you use to focus on when practicing. I think when we were talking about just focusing on basic instruments, this is a while back. I want to say this is a few months ago when we were talking here on the jam streams, but I was talking about using individual instruments and focusing on just drilling the one and then upping the complexity for those. So like kick drills, starting with the simple 4/4, and then rather than adding in the rest of the instruments just for kick practice on its own, you start increasing the speed of the kicks. So you go from quarter notes to eighth notes. And from there, 16th note kicks are harder. It's much more like machine gun and rapid fire. That's really good practice to get faster and more consistent with the speed of doing the kicks. And from there, you do things like doing rapid double kicks, kind of like a gallop. And then we talked about the triple kicks again. You add back-to-back triple kicks, and then it's even more kind of like a galloping rhythm. That's really important to practice as part of the general reinforcing basics in beatboxing. It's something I find myself doing that in the shower more than anything else, when I don't have to focus on what I'm doing, because I can sit there and just go on autopilot, essentially doing one instrument, whether it's a kick or even something like hats, doing hat runs, starting with, quarter notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, eighth notes. Same thing. 16 notes, hats. I don't even know if I can do. I guess I can. It's just not my strongest sound. Now, 30-second notes, I know I can't do double that speed. But you start doing things like open hat, close hat runs as your training drill example 2. You can't see on my model, but I'm actually doing the motions of the cymbals in my hands for some reason. But it's the same idea. changing up the rhythm to either be double time, rapid, or even something less common. We talk about swing rhythms every once in a while. If you've ever seen Rick and Morty, the snake jazz rhythm. Swing rhythms are fun. I kind of want to do more with swing rhythms if I can figure out good ways to put them into beat construction and getting them to kind of mesh with everything. But if we take all that and then put the entire kit together for the sounds and the drills, I think people tend to gravitate towards certain beats or rhythms that are comfortable. I think it's really important in beatboxing to know what you're consistently comfortable with and then try and push outside of that, either by learning an irregular rhythm or just listen to a song that has a different type of rhythm that sounds different from what you normally hear when you gravitate towards music, if that makes sense. And then see if you can replicate that particular rhythm. That's what I did with the sleep token example. I knew that 3/4 or 6/8 could be done in like a waltz, but in kind of a more progressive metal, like alt rhythm. Hearing it there and hearing the way it sounds in that song, The Summoning, I was like, okay, I can figure out a way to duplicate that and figure out a way to make it sound similar and then start building on that as an example. And then it became my 3/4 or 6/8 training example. Now, I think I mentioned this one time on stream when I did this in one of the redeems, but what I've been practicing in addition to just that rhythm itself is incorporating other sounds to it, specifically basses, because I could sit there and just do the beat pretty much without thinking. It's not that difficult. Mixing it up and being consistent is where it gets difficult, but trying to add in other sounds that are not part of the percussion line is where it's like the next layer of practicing. And I think what I've been doing is trying to mimic the instrumentation from the track that the rhythm came from, like thinking about what the bass line in The Summoning sounds like and trying to just pick pieces from that to pair with it because it's familiar. But what you might hear as I start experimenting around with that example and then using it for actual patterns or routines, I'm going to try and figure out a way to add in a lot of the other sound sets, again, like the vocalized basses, to build out the song, as it were, because it's just a rhythm. It's just drums. But there needs to be other things in there for it to be an actual performed song. That's the next step after the training for the rhythm itself. Learning how to bring in all the other skill sets and tools from the beatbox arsenal to, again, make it sound like a complete song through layering, adding in vocalized instrumentation or even non-vocalized instrumentation to flesh it out, to make it more complex and make it more kind of complete as a song. And so that's the next tier of difficulty. I'll probably report back on that at some point just to kind of explain what I've come up with. And maybe if we return to the rhythm discussion again in the future, I'll have a more complex example of what I've put together for that type of drill. I could say, all right, here's my pairing of like a throat bass line to add some lower end and some distortion to the actual really complicated rhythm that's going on. So when I get to that point, I'll talk about it. I'll make sure to point it out, since it might be 3 months from now since we've had this discussion, and I expect everything to sort of evolve. So that should be interesting. But that's roughly the overview I wanted to talk about when it comes to rhythms. I think one of the things that gives beatboxing a lot of its variety, but unless you're a music student or studying under a music student, for people who are interested in getting into beatboxing and learning, the best thing I can tell you to do is just listen to music. Listen to a lot of music and try and pick out things that you can hear in the way a rhythm is constructed, and then take that back and try and deconstruct it, or reverse engineer all of its components, and then turn it into something you can practice. And then by doing that, you'll get kind of programmed into your brain a lot of things that deviate from just the standard. Again, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I find that just getting exposed to a lot of music will help with that. All right. I think we are good to move on to the BGM brainstorming portion of the stream. Before I start switching my devices around, I guess I'll open the floor up to the questions for anyone in chat. If you have any questions related to what we've been discussing today or anything that I mentioned, then feel free to let me know. If anything comes up while we're doing the BGM stuff, you could still ask me questions then. It's not like I'm going to cut off questions. But it's a very interesting topic of discussion. I've been thinking about that one all week, thinking about how I wanted to present the information and talk through it on stream with everybody today. So what I'll do is I'll just leave the door open for questions rather than just sit here and stare at the screen. And if any come up, let me know. But first, I need to switch my devices so that I can talk and then have the synth hooked up to the loop at the same time. So let me plug my mic into my Scarlett and then I'll turn the synth on. So you're going to probably hear a bit of feedback while I turn on the synth. And then we'll sound check everything, make sure it's audible. And then we'll jump into BGM brainstorming. So let me change the caption before I do anything else. Okay. Let me just move this cable over. All right. The sound is going to sound a little differently because I'm in a different device, but you should be able to hear me on mic. And I can unmute my RC505 and turn my synth on. Make sure we remove our boosts to not get that weird buzzing. Okay, I think we got sound coming in from the synth, okay? Let's see if we can pick a drum kit to use. Thinking about other things with the time signature discussion and the different rhythms, I believe the second to last track of the first RPG BGM album, which was The Lost Kingdom, Astral Tyrant, which I don't have just on hand, but I'm pretty sure that one was in 3. That one is either in 3 or 6. That was I could probably duplicate the rhythm here. That one and Demon of the Rift, the kind of final boss track of the sequel project, Songs of the Spiral, they have similar rhythms and styles because they're meant to be somewhat kind of connected thematically. The rhythm instrumentation itself is different, but it's kind of a similar pattern. I think I did both of those in 3. Now that I think about it, whenever I do another one of those, I should make sure and pick a different time signature for the rhythm. Red Dragon says, "Well, it's late here. So I have to go to bed. I need to be up at 8 a.m. Night all. All right, Red Dragon. Thanks for tuning in, hanging out. I understand we started later than normal today, so no worries. I will definitely catch you in the next one. I will work on the stream schedule. That'll hopefully be up before I go to sleep tonight. I don't know what next week's schedule is going to look like. We might be back tomorrow. We'll see. But I'll put Elden Ring on the schedule for Saturday. That should be going off as normal. And we'll just see what happens. Yeah, take it easy, and I'll catch you later. This I'm just noodling around the exact example that we've been talking through for the 3/4 and 6/8. Let's see. Style-wise, I kind of want to do something slower and maybe a bit more kind of heavy in feel. Let's see how we want to establish the rhythm. Like we do on these exercises for brainstorming BGM. I like to start with the rhythm because one, it defines the BPM of the track, and two, it kind of drives the feel and where we're going as far as how the song shakes out. Okay, we could use analog. I think I like that slightly sharper snare better. Okay, thinking about other songs that we've done up till now and try not to fall in the same. This is like Mortal Coils. Let's start with, instead of going for the complete rhythm, let's start with just the kick line. Okay, yeah, that's a little bit more movement to it. So we'll start with the kick, and then we'll figure out where we're going to put things like the snares, hats, and everything else we're going to layer into the rhythm. Okay, maybe go like that. One full repeat. Looks like it's slightly cut off on the end. I think that was too late. Yeah. I gotta get the rust off a little bit. It's been a while since I've worked on the loop station. There we go. That's better. Oh, we could layer a double at the end. Okay, let's add that in for layer 2. I think the third to last one was off. There we go. Now let's see. Let's find another hat to use. Let's try layering in a clap underneath the regular snare hit. Let's try a rim shot instead. We're kind of going into like a dance rhythm now, almost like a dance hall rhythm. Maybe if we put a little more variation on, almost be like a reggaeton. Let's go on to bass. What we'll do is we'll go guitar to bass to give the low end some boost. I realize the playback might be a little too loud. Let me drop the rhythm playback down a bit. Okay, so this is what strings sound like with the bass boost underneath. Ooh, if we go kind of just single steps like that, it makes it sound a bit more evil. That's got some legs. What if we tried another instrument, not strings? And we could slice it. Might be able to go. Oh, that's pattern 1. No wonder. I think I like sustained notes better than the choppy ones, at least for the bass line. It's got some potential. Okay, we got that captured. Let's see how it sounds. We could add unboosted strings under that. Maybe make it low. Very subtle, but it does add a little bit more push underneath the bass line. Ooh, leading in with a filtered intro could yield some pretty interesting results, especially if we start with both the rhythm and the bass line with that distorted kind of muffled warble to it. I think I like that. We'll put a pin in that idea for when we're actually putting the order of how things should be performed together for this one. Now let's move up to the first melody layer. We could go for a single sustained note, which we've done on a couple tracks before. But what if we went for a different string instrument? This is the pizzicato one won't work because it's not sustained. It's just a single stab. Could turn that into another layer too. That could be fun. We could put that on 4. Add some delay to give it a bit more resonance. Yeah, that's not bad. Oop. Maybe back off a little bit. Okay, I'm gonna get it recorded and we'll see how it layers. And have a little bit of gap at the end before the whole thing repeats to give all the other instruments a little bit room to breathe so it's not constantly looping back to back. Let's add the strings. Put that on the wrong one. So you have a single sustained note that sort of stretches all the way through the changes in the bass line and also the plucked string melody. I do like how there's no hiccup or stutter at the end of the tail for the single note string. That's one thing that gets a little bit tricky when you're turning it on and off. It's pretty seamless. And it doesn't cut out when the whole thing reloops, which is good. I'd have to do that again otherwise. Okay, still have an empty track. We can think of something else to put in there. But first, let's save our work. So we have kind of a more, again, kind of a reggaeton adjacent rhythm, but a very kind of moody and almost oppressive dark tones with the bass line and the strings. And the plucked notes kind of are in the middle. It doesn't really skew it one way or another in my ears, but it's definitely not kind of like a let's party. It's kind of more like an evil party, which could lend itself well to a Halloween release. Okay, let's look at the instruments and see what we can add. Ooh, choir synths would definitely add to the kind of creepiness of the song. It's not bad. I think maybe a little too high though. That's a little better. Drop that down the mix a little bit. Could layer it. I think we want to go one octave lower and then drop the volume so it's a little not quite the same. Let's try that. Now I gotta kind of think of whether or not this is competing with the single sustained note or if it meshes, because it follows kind of like a harmony path and it doesn't deviate, so I don't think it clashes too much. This is what it sounds like without having the sustained note at the same time. Okay, I think this has potential. Now let's do kind of a rough cut of how this will be performed from start to finish. We talked about having come in with the filter, so it would be bass line plus rhythm coming in filtered to start, and then we bring in the other instruments kind of in sequence and have some drop out and some stay. So let's see how that sounds. Bring in the strings. I'm going to gradually fade them in a little bit better than that. We could go beatless for a little bit. Bring in the choir synths. Fade out the sustained note. What happens if we filter it with the choir synths? Sounds like they're underwater. Fade them out. I'm thinking we go bassless, just the rhythm and the plucks, and that's how we end the track. Okay. Not a bad combination. I think I'm happy with that sequence there. So we'll leave that one. We'll have it saved and captured. That seems like it'd be a good addition for an upcoming Halloween project. I have not thought about what I'm going to be doing for this year's Halloween project in October. Still a ways off. But collecting a bunch of tracks that have sort of like a dark and creepy mood will probably give me some ideas about where to steer the overall results when it comes to putting everything together for that one. So we'll just have to see. All right, let's move on to another one. Okay, we're going to clear this off, and we're going to start all over from the beginning. I think I want to go back to drum and bass. Question is, what sort of flavor we want to put on drum and bass? I'm thinking we start with the kind of standard rhythm that you hear in a lot of higher speed drum and bass songs, and we'll think about what kind of creative stuff we can do with the hats and everything else that layers around just the kick and the snare. That kind of muted sharp snare is different. I don't think I've used that for drum and bass type rhythm so far. Okay, got an idea on how we can mix things up for this one. So let's start with this, and we're going to layer in a bunch of other things, and I'm going to put the hats on a different track. See if we can add another stronger kick behind that. It's actually harder than it sounds. Maybe we'll leave that for now. So I want to add this eighth notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I can do that on the 4 count. Okay, I'm setting some stuff up that we can use to kind of have some fun with the rhythm here. By putting the hats on its own track and using something like beat repeat to cut it up faster, that's how we're getting like 30-second notes. Okay, but we want to add in some more snare punch to the actual main beat itself. Okay, along those lines, but there we go. A bit more punch. Okay, bass time. Second most important aspect in drum and bass. First being the drums. We're gonna go heavy for this one. We want sustained. That's not a bad start. That might have been not enough of the final high step at the end. Yeah. There we go. Okay. Let's loop it. Layer in some strings underneath. We cut them up a little bit. Maybe instead of cutting it, we could see if delay will work. No, I don't think so because it's too sustained. If we combine it with slicer, we could. Let's add that as a layer. Let's see how it sounds. Now this is going to be a little bit tricky because I have that cut effect, the rapid cut for beat repeat. I have to essentially make all the tracks except the hats immune or disabled with their track level effects. So if I do anything else, I have to turn everything on and off kind of quick, which is a little bit tough to do in real time. Okay, this does have a bit of a similar vibe to Satellite Strobe, I want to say. So rather than go for like a real like sharp beeping synth, we want to come up with a higher melody that's going to sound distinct from this one. We could go 329, my favorite. Maybe go regular delay. Give it kind of a video gamey sound. All right, let's see where we can have the melody land that's going to kind of complement everything we've got so far. That might be a little loud. That's not bad. That's going to sound similar to the intro we used in Satellite Strobe. Let's record that and see how it sounds if we kind of match the levels. Okay, got it captured. I think even that might be too similar. Let me actually grab that track real quick while I'm thinking about it. I think we're really, really close in note progression to what we did on Satellite Strobe. It's been a long time since we did that one, so let me check. You folks can't hear the playback. I'm just listening to it real quick. The bass line's not identical. Okay, the bass line's actually very different. It still goes up, but its progression when it comes back down is a little different. But what about the synth line? Okay, I think the synth line is what's similar. Mm, it's close. It's not identical, which is good, but it's close. The This is roughly what the progression sounds like on that song. Sorry, it starts up here. So it's kind of like the inverse. Yeah, this one keeps going up. It doesn't come up and then step back down. So thankfully the progression's not identical. I think the synth line meshes pretty well when the bass line is active at the same time. Some of that fuzzy distortion gets a little bit drowned out by the bass. Being able to cut the hi-hats into that rapid run is pretty interesting. I can't think if I've used that effect that way on a track so far. I can actually leave the effect on because it only kicks into the rapid fire till I max out the effect knob. So I can turn it off and on, or up and down rather, without having to turn the effect on and off. Almost like a DJ real-time effect. Rather than just have it be rapid and off, I can turn it up and down. We think about how we could fade out all the tracks on the outro. Ending on the rapid hat would be a bold move. That'd be interesting. Okay, let's think about the order of how we'd have this thing start. Thinking maybe we go bass first, because I think, well, Satellite Strobe starts with the beat first, and then the bass line kicks in. So we don't want to have it be in the exact same order. So we can go bass line first. I think bass line, unaltered hat run to start, fade in the beat, fade in the synth, and then we start playing around with the order and layering, and then adding in the rapid synth is a way to cut up the rhythm as it started. So let's go bass line first. Hats. Beat. Fade and synth. Rapid fire synth or hat. Meant to cut everything out except the bass line and the synth. Now, I don't think I want to go filter effect here because we just did that on the track we were looking at before. What I was mentioning earlier about the tricky part of trying to add in other effects besides just the cut up effect on the hat is because I have to disable track effects for everything that's not the hats in order to get that rapid fire cut and have it not slice up everything else that's playing. So if I want to play another effect, I have to kind of toggle all the other tracks to be enabled with track effects really quickly. And I don't know if I could do that on the fly when I'm recording this. So that's one of the challenges. If we wanted to muffle the hats themselves, maybe we need a high pass filter. This is the high pass filter turned all the way up. It's kind of subtle, but it adds a little bit of dryness to the way that hat hits. I don't know if I like that. Trying to time the speed of the hat to when stuff drops in and out could be a good way to switch things up. Because I would like to drop the beat out and have just the everything else playing, but I don't think I want it to be rapid fire at the same time. But being able to toggle the rapid fire cutting up of the hat to when the beat comes in and out will be an interesting touch, I think. Being able to control it just by turning the knob up and down is kind of useful. And then maybe we end with just the hat. I'll have to think about that when I go to record this. And we technically do have one extra track. That's only 4 of 5. We might not even need a 5th one. I'll have to think about that. Maybe we could add some kind of supplementary sound effects or something that'll pair with everything else. But really, it doesn't need it. I think the track will more or less stand on its own, and being able to toggle between the different effects, I think, gives it a bit more of variety that I haven't seen on any of the other ones we've done recently. That's an interesting experiment. I want to work on drum and bass some more. I don't think I'd do a dedicated full drum and bass release where it's nothing but all those tracks. I think they kind of sound samey, but I do want to sprinkle in more kind of experimenting with drum and bass rhythms and that type of sound style. Maybe if we could find a way to stitch together like faster drum and bass stuff with maybe slower, heavier stuff like a dubstep, like drum step type track, that would be interesting. Eventually, I want to circle back to kind of more aggressive, like heavier electronic type sounds and kind of constructing things around like really harsh or strong bass drops and whatnot. I think would be fun. But I'm pretty satisfied with the way that one turned out. So we've got 2 tracks we've managed to get through on stream here. Looking at the time, I don't think I have time to do another one. It is getting a little bit late. I gotta take care of some stuff for the end of the day. Also, we should probably check the weather outside. Well, it doesn't look like it's actively still snowing, but the sun went down and everything is covered, so I guess I'm not going anywhere tomorrow. That's fine. I think what we'll do is we will get ready to wrap up from here. I think if we work on another one, we'll be going for probably another half an hour or so. Like I said, I got to take care of some stuff before it gets too late. So let me see who is online that we can raid, and we will look at spreading some chill vibes. I see Lib is online. Special events. Wonder what's going on over there. We can go see how the Bear VTuber is doing. So let me go ahead and queue up that here. And we'll go ahead and get ready and go to outro. Overall, I think we had some productive conversations about beatboxing technique and sound theory. It was good to get back and kind of get back into discussing things and working through examples of how to be better at beatboxing. Like I mentioned earlier on the stream, I will start working on the stream schedule for next week. I'm kind of waiting for a couple things to firm up with work, so it could affect how much I'm going to be able to stream during the week. But like I told Red Dragon, our regular appointment to continue Elden Ring should not be affected on Saturday. So I might go... Maybe I'll do Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. I don't know. I might put like a question mark day or leave it up in the air in the middle of the week. Because again, I'm waiting on some work stuff to firm up. And it won't actively happen until we get in the work week. So until then, I will figure that out. Like I said, thanks for hanging out and talking through beatbox stuff. Now let's go see how Lib and their community are doing, and I'll catch you folks in the next one.